It's hard to believe, but Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has already been out for a half a year, and with 2 more waves of the DLC coming this year, those who have finished the game have been getting stuck in speculating what could possibly be in store, particularly with Wave 4's DLC story. Hey everyone, it's Yggdrasiel, and welcome back to another Xenoblade Chronicles video. In this video, I wanted to give my personal opinions on the 2 prevailing theories regarding the new story coming to Xenoblade Chronicles 3 by the end of this year. On top of that, I also wanted to give in my own theory on what we could possibly expect with the DLC story. So with all of that said, if you enjoy what I have to say in this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel, and let me know what your thoughts or hopes for the DLC are in the comments down below, and let's get right into the video. Alright, now as for the Wave 4 DLC story, we know that it's been attributed by Monolith Soft to being an experience on the same level as Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Torna the Golden Country. Now, I'm first going to start by giving off 2 of the prominent theories I've seen floating around, then I would like to throw in a theory of my own that I don't think many people have yet to consider. So then, the 2 most notable camps, Team Prequel, aka something to do with the founders, and Team Sequel, where our group will be able to be where they belong with one another once more. On top of many people hoping that the Wave 4 DLC story is where we are going to be getting cameos of the casts of Xenoblade 1 and 2, which I also personally support, there are also a lot of expectations for the DLC story to fill us in on many ambiguous questions that the base story left unanswered or almost obnoxiously presented, like how light came to be learned as a medium between the 2 worlds, how did Nia become the queen and spearhead Alrest's half of origin, who really are the founders, and of course, what is Lucky 7, also known as the Sword of the End, and why does Riku know and have it? Heck, why is Riku even implied to have a history with Melia? And also, Nopon in general just don't make sense in the world of Ionios, given many of them are decades old, yet soldiers don't even question it. But alright, that last one's probably not getting answered, but you know what I mean. The point is, there are a lot of loose threads and inquiries left over, and players are looking for at least the majority of them to be answered. Let's start with the prequel idea then. The general consensus to my knowledge is that people want more info on the founders, who are the first Ouroboros and the literal founders of the city, having fought against Mobius and truly freeing their people from the yoke of the Flame Clocks. I've no doubt if you've come to this video for speculation, you've likely already seen the many other speculation videos on just who these individuals may be, and their abruptly inserted and highly vague entries paired with the statues during the introduction to the city really highlight that they are indeed meant to be an intentional topic of speculation. Some have striking appearances to characters we know, like House Ortiz's founder, looking strikingly similar to Shulk, but then he's actually a long-lived former Kevesi, while others like House Raid and House Cassini's founders were both women yet chose their mentors to represent their legacies. Now, the idea of this being the story feels rather cozily aligned with what Monolith Soft did with Torna. In the base story of Xenoblade 2, we have some memories of Jin, a few glances of Laura in the ice, the haziness of, well, who's haze really, and above everything, one of the forefront thoughts in a lot of people's minds, including my own, prior to Torna's announcement was, man, wouldn't it be cool to see what the Aegis War was even like? It feels to me that if we're going to take Monolith Soft words quite literally, the founders give off that same scope. On top of that, being the first Ouroboros would also likely mean more introspection on the nature of Ouroboros itself. However, I'm not going to be discontent with the DLC if they choose not to cover the founders. For one, unlike many of the other questions that need to be resolved, I'm quite fond of the vague descriptions that the founders have that have allowed for these speculations to take place. To me, they almost feel like one of Monolith Soft's time-honored questions that are best left to personal interpretation, and their descriptions, tied along with the historical narrative that the city drives, creates a great recipe for providing fans something to talk about and discuss, while not exactly being overly necessary for the game's initial story to be told, unlike many of the other questions that the main story left unanswered. To that end, even though they could use the founders as the DLC story, I personally don't think it would be the best course of action. So then, what about a sequel? Monolith Soft initially addressed to fans that we would have a pretty good idea of what to expect from the future of the series after playing the DLC story. And of course, we also have the DLC's key art showing all three of the main title game's signature weapons. What's more, the bittersweet ending of 3's main story has many fans hoping to have some more time with Team Ouroboros. And while those tidbits definitely intrigue me, especially the what's to come from the series part, I don't see a direct sequel being the most probable case either. For one, and again, the same with what I said regarding the potential for the prequel, the story has to be able to address many of the questions that the main story left unanswered to be satisfactory for many of the current players. I personally do not see a sequel being able to answer many of these unknowns unless it takes place in a new world entirely. What I mean by this is, Aionios doesn't exist at the end of the main story of Xenoblade 3. The save state of origin was successfully launched after the defeat of Mobius. The two worlds separated, although traces of their flawed coexistence are retained. Case in point, Noah reacts to the Officer's tune at the end of the game. There would need to be a new setting and scenario that isn't Aionios, which would have to be quite some time in the future when the people of the two worlds met once again. What's more, where would the Sword of the End even be? While Noah dramatically threw it into the Endless Sea at the end of the game, that future is not the main course any longer. So either the sword is out there somewhere, or the metal still remains hunkered down in either world's segment of origin. And regarding what the DLC's key art shows, that is, the three blades will be together, and by correlation, the meeting up of Shulk, Rex, and not necessarily Noah, but whoever wields the Sword of the End at that point, the world has to be set up at a point that is feasible for these protagonists or their future successors to those weapons to meet. What's more, there would also have to be a new threat, as this is a future without the coalesced manifestation of emotions that gave rise to Mobius. A new threat would have to appear and then be dealt with, while giving us as players a premonition of what is to come, while at the same time this would become the new designated stopping point for the primary Xenoblade Chronicles trilogy, as Monolith Soft implied, which in my opinion wouldn't be as good a stopping point as compared to the base story of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, where they chose to leave things off. Bearing all of this in mind is why I personally can't see a sequel story being the best option. Of course, a new setting would also mean new factors and story beats, and I'm sure Monolith Soft would know how to pilot their own narrative creation, but again, creating these new beats while also addressing the questions that the main game left feels just quite like a tall order to satisfyingly pull off. At the very least, if we're going to get a sequel about foreshadowing like we did with Future Connected, I just don't want to see anything like him. Please. Never again. Well then, I'm not particularly going nuts for a Founders prequel, and the idea of a sequel doesn't really appeal to me. So what'd be my preference, huh? What are my own 2 cents into what the new story could be? And I know it's very grandiose, and I'd be even remotely surprised if a fraction of this were going to happen. But here I go. I want to see a prequel to the prequel. Something even further back than the Founders. I am talking about a story taking place as the worlds have only a bit of time left until the collision that sparked the main story of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. If I had to take a stab at naming this entry myself, I would title it something along the lines of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Origin: The Arc of Worlds. This would then of course be a game taking place after both the events of Xenoblade 1 and 2, continuing from the pre-established foreshadowing of Future Connected with the appearance of the fog, and would be capable of answering every single remaining question that the main story of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 had, while providing an insightful, emotional, and dark lens to look at the events leading up to Origin's failure, something that would indeed be in the same vein as the gripping tales and revelations of Torna the Golden Country. Imagine new main zones set in the worlds of post-story Xenoblade 1 and 2, where 2 separately controlled groups with gimmicks that pertain to their respective games will communicate and work with one another through the medium of light to prepare for the time of Origin's activation, while circumventing any possible threats like more fog beasts. Over the course of the journey, each group would gain exposition that would answer questions that 3's story left unanswered. The group in Xenoblade 1's world would fill us in on who is Riku exactly, and what is his acquaintance with Queen Melia, as well as further detailing Lucky 7, while the group in Xenoblade 2's world would fill us in on how Nia became a primary figurehead in that world, how light became a medium of communication between the worlds in the first place, and how the plan to bring about Origin was conceived. These groups could consist of either returning members from the prior casts of both games, or we could have new characters entirely that would interact with said cast members. Heck, were I to inhale a couple more huffs of copium, if we get 3 new characters on each side, these could then even be the founders themselves in the time before Aionios. We could also get more refined details of aspects of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Answered, like the nature of Ouroboros, more exposition on the fog, and the annihilation events that those preordain. All of this would culminate in an ending zone taking place within Origin just before both worlds begin to collide. The members of both worlds would be in their respective half of Origin to oversee things, so when things went bad, our 2 groups are then in a space that would allow them to be physically interactive with one another. This would also be the point where all 3 of the Blades then truly meet and work together as they reach the heart of Origin to discover the reason for the device's failure, the newly birthed true Mobius Z, acting as the DLC's final story boss. While we'd then win this fight, the cutscenes after would have Z outmaneuver us at the last and capture Melia, allowing Mobius to assume full control over Origin and ending the story just as dramatically and as grim as they did with Torna the Golden Country. Right as things would wind down, or perhaps even just before the encounter with Mobius, Melia and Riku would make a promise to one another that would ultimately be honored when she is rescued in 3's main story, and also by having central figures like Melia and Nia, and I'd also have to assume Poppy within Origin, it would explain why they were spared from being lost in Mobius's Endless Now. And that is how the DLC story would end, with the formation of Aionios as depicted to us by Nia in the Cloud Keep. Perhaps even at the end of the DLC story, after all of the credits, the screen could go black, and then we hear the same off-scene tune that was being played at the end of 3's main story, where we would then get a scene that could provide a little bit of insight on what's coming next in the Xenoblade Chronicles series. It's quite a lot to ask for, I know, and obviously I don't expect even half of that to be what is going to happen should Monolith Soft choose to do something similar to it for the DLC story, but it's just what I think would be a worthwhile journey that would allow us to get the answers we need and let us see some old familiar faces along the way. Again, this was all just my own personal theory, and like all of you guys, I have no clue how they plan to deliver this new entry in the series. Only time can tell, but I will say that it has been quite fun speculating with all of you guys in the months since Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has released. I'll be continuing to cover Xenoblade Chronicles news as we get more info, really hoping for a Nintendo Direct announcement sometime soon regarding Wave 3's DLC, but that is where I'm going to be calling it for this video. Thank you all very much for taking the time to watch and hear me out. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed what I had to say, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more Xenoblade content. And of course, also please let me know what you think the Xenoblade 3 DLC story will be like, and anything you'd particularly like to see. Again, thank you all very much for watching, and as always, have a great day.